We turn now to former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Robert Gates, who we spoke with on Friday from the College of William and Mary, where he serves as chancellor. We began by asking him why national security should matter to voters this election year.
Our leaders need to bring these issues home to the American people in a very direct way. The world isn't going to ignore us just because we think we can ignore the world. So the first thing is to make clear that if we don't deal with these problems early, they become very dangerous problems and very costly problems for the United States down the road. The other is to explain to the American people, for example, how we are economically interconnected with the rest of the world.
Well, if President Trump were to win again, what could he do differently in a second term that would give him a stronger legacy? I know you've been critical of some of his behavior when he was in office.
I think you'd probably see significantly different domestic policies in a number of areas. I think one thing he's been clear about for a long time is the need for tariffs to protect American industry and so on. I think he would also have a different approach in many areas with respect to foreign policy. And in terms of trying to end the war in Ukraine, it's never made quite clear how he's going to do that or what terms he would have to agree to, or how he would handle the issues in the South China Sea differently. So, you know, I think that there's an element of unpredictability in his case of not knowing what he really has in mind to deal with any of these specific issues, especially on national security.
Would you be open to voting for Mr. Trump?
Oh, I'm not even going to begin to go there.
Because you did write an essay in Foreign Affairs a few months ago where you were pretty specific in criticism. You said his disdain for allies, fondness for authoritarian leaders, erratic behavior undermined U.S. credibility. You were also critical of President Biden and his withdrawal from Afghanistan, which you said further damaged the world's confidence in America. Do you think Mr. Biden has been able to repair that damage?
I think that he gained a lot of credibility with the speed with which he assembled the coalition of partner countries, allies and friends, before, during, and after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, putting together that 36 countries willing to help Ukraine with money, with military assistance, and so on. Being able to warn the allies before the Russians actually invaded so that when they did, we had enormous credibility with others, that we knew what we were talking about and we knew the nature of Putin's threat. I think a lot of people would agree that there have been some unnecessary delays in getting necessary equipment to certain kinds of equipment to the Ukrainians, and I'm not talking about the 6-month late supplemental that was just passed by the Congress. I'm talking about going back a year and a half or 2 years, whether it was tanks or missiles or aircraft, that after long debate and deliberation, decision was finally made to provide them.
Vladimir Putin was in China this past week visiting his ally, Xi Jinping. And he said Friday, Russian troops are advancing daily in Ukraine. What do you think it will take to stop this momentum?
Well, this is one of the places where, frankly, the 6-month delay in getting the supplemental passed has been a problem because and poses a real crisis, I think. The circumstances in Ukraine right now are quite dire. The Russians are moving not only around Kharkiv, but elsewhere along the front. Putin has taken the last 6 months to a year to rearm, re-equip, to recruit. I've read numbers that he's putting as many as 30,000 new troops a month into Ukraine. They have more troops in Ukraine now, the Russians do, than they did at the beginning of the war.
During that time, Russia has also built up more support for its effort with Iran, with North Korea supplying it weapons, with China now, U.S. intelligence says, helping to reconstitute Russia's military-industrial base, even jointly producing drones. What consequence should there be for a country like China for helping this war to continue?
There are a variety of other sanctions that are available to the administration and to the Europeans that could bring additional pressure on the Chinese at a time when their economy is not doing very well. They could. They could. The Chinese have very large stakes in other problems and other relationships around the world in addition to Russia. And you know, until a year or so ago, they were being pretty careful about what they were providing to the Russians. They still have not, as best we know, have not provided actual weapons to the Russians. That's been a red line for the United States. And Putin, frankly, and if you look at the cabinet changes that Putin has just made, they're all focused on militarizing the Russian economy to sustain a huge military for a long time going forward. This is not a one-time problem with just Ukraine. Putin has decided to take Russia in a different direction that poses a real threat to all of its neighbors. And the Chinese, by helping them, are enabling that.
Well, the Chinese president was just touring through Europe, and he was in France. I wonder what you think about the French president's statement that nothing should be ruled out when it comes to sending Western troops to Ukraine. I know some other European countries have also leaned into that idea. Should it be taken off the table by both Biden and Trump?
I think the notion of deploying NATO troops into Ukraine causes a lot of domestic concern, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. I don't think you take things off the table, but I also don't think you put them on the table in an explicit way. You know, part of my problem is that our government talks too much, and some other governments talk too much as well. Sometimes it's better just to do things and not tell people you're doing them. But maybe that's the old CIA guy.
Is that suggesting more training then of Ukrainian troops?
I think we are clearly, there's going to have to be more training of the Ukrainians, particularly with their new conscription law and a number of new young people coming into the Ukrainian military.
Should that take
that training can take place in Western Europe, or it conceivably could take place in Ukraine as well.
One of the guests on our program, J.D. Vance, a senator from Ohio, has likened U.S. support for Ukraine to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, making that argument that there's like a creeping U.S. role potentially. He also went to the Munich Security Conference, but skipped meetings with President Zelensky and the head of NATO, saying he wouldn't learn anything new. What do you say to a leading Republican like him?
Rather than get into specific personalities, I just think that people need to open their eyes and be willing to listen to other points of view and be willing to learn, particularly from people who've been around, like Senator McConnell and others, who can help him and others understand that this is a different kind of aggression by far than what happened in Iraq in 2003. And there is no assurance that Putin will stop with Ukraine, and to not understand that potential threat, and also the degree to which it encourages other aggressors around the world. I think some additional information, briefings, and education may be required.
I want to ask you about the Middle East, where there already are multiple shooting wars on multiple fronts involving U.S. ally Israel. Do you agree with President Biden's decision to withhold some specific armaments from the Netanyahu government while surging others?
One of the things that has struck me has been the degree to which the Netanyahu government has essentially ignored the views and requests of its closest ally, beginning with more humanitarian assistance and taking care of the civilians in Gaza. I think that there are ways that we can pressure Israel. The truth of the matter is, 2,000-pound bombs that are not precision-guided inevitably lead to a lot of collateral damage. They basically collapse buildings. I'm all for providing all other kinds of weapons to Israel, including precision-guided bombs and other equipment that they may need. But I think when our allies ignore us, and particularly on issues that are of huge importance to us and to the region, then I think it's reasonable to take actions that try to get their attention.
There were extraordinary statements from Israel's defense minister this past week where he publicly criticized his own prime minister, saying he can't get an answer to some key questions like what happens at the end of this war. He called on Netanyahu to make a decision, declare Israel will not establish civilian control or military control over the Gaza Strip, and start talking to international actors about who is going to govern. What do you think about such a public split like this in the midst of the war?
Well, it's pretty extraordinary, but I think not unexpected. You know, the United States government has been asking Prime Minister Netanyahu for months, what's your plan? What happens after the shooting stops? Where are you going with this? What's the solution politically? What's the solution economically and in humanitarian terms? And neither we nor the Israelis, including his own defense minister, get any answers to those questions.
I know you said you've never been a fan of Bibi Netanyahu. You said you met him back in 1989. Are your concerns in regard to U.S. national security that he could draw the U.S. into a wider conflict?
My biggest concern, and we need to back up and have a little perspective here, there are in fact 4 wars going on in the Middle East right now. Not only the war in Gaza, but the war on Israel's northern border with Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and the disruption of the global supply chains through their attacks in the Red Sea, and then the militias in Syria and in Iraq. There is one power behind all 4 of these conflicts, and that's Iran. And what we're not talking about, we've become so preoccupied with Gaza, what we've failed to talk sufficiently about is how do we deal with an Iran that is basically the one providing the arms, the planning, and the intelligence in all 4 of these conflicts, and that Iran is the source of the problem.